The Palestinians don't exist. You know it, and we know it. We've been pretending all these years. We're going to stop pretending. You know, and we know that the Palestinians were invented by Yasser Arafat and the KGB in 1964 as a propaganda tactic, and it's worked great, but it's over. It is a central aspect of Islamic belief that what the tradition actually says is the last day will not come until Muslims kill Jews. And so if any Muslim wants to bring about the last day, the judgment day, the consummation of all things, the end of the world, if any Muslim wants to bring that about, he can kill Jews, and that will help bring it about. So this creates the idea that killing Jews is not just a matter of politically trying to gain an advantage over Israel and ultimately destroy it. It is an eschatological and spiritual imperative, and it is nothing less than an act of worship, as Hamas has said on more than one occasion, that Allah has made killing Jews an act of worship for them. And so this is not something that is peripheral or will end with some kind of negotiated agreement. This is a war that will continue as long as there are people who believe in Muhammad and Islam and the Quran. The Muslim Brotherhood, it must be understood, was formed in order to create a global Muslim state. Now, it might seem totally fanciful and absolutely beyond belief that anybody would think, yes, we're going to unify all the Muslims in the world into one, excuse me, into one big mega state. And it's likely never to happen. But that is the goal of the Muslim Brotherhood because of the idea of the caliphate. The caliphate is the global Muslim community, the political entity to which all Muslims must belong according to Islamic law. The caliph, the word caliph, khalifa, means successor. And the successor, the caliph, is the successor of Muhammad as the political, military, and spiritual leader of all the Muslims worldwide. After Muhammad, there was the period of the four so-called rightly guided caliphs. Then there was the Umayyad Caliphate, the Abbasid Caliphate, the Ottoman Caliphate, and all of those claimed, although of course in practice none of them attained it, but all of them claimed to be the single global government for all Muslims worldwide. Now, in 1924, the secular Turkish government abolished the caliphate. And this is where all the jihad terror groups in the world, Al-Qaeda and ISIS and Hamas and Hezbollah, every last one of them, they say that's where our troubles began. Because the Muslim world was thrown into a disunity that limited its power. And what we need to do is reunite the Islamic world, restore the caliphate, and then we can wage jihad against Israel and the rest and destroy the enemies of Islam. So in 1928, 4 years after the abolition of the caliphate, the Muslim Brotherhood was founded in Egypt in order to restore the caliphate. It has obviously not succeeded yet in doing so, but it is now a global movement and is working all around the world to attain this goal. The Hamas is part of the Muslim Brotherhood, calls itself the Muslim Brotherhood for Palestine. And so theoretically, Hamas is not even working for a Palestinian state. It is working to make Israel, to destroy Israel and make the area in that Israel inhabits be part of the Islamic world again, so that it will ultimately be part of the global caliphate that the Muslim Brotherhood wants to establish. Now, this means that every jihad terror group is working in the same way in various countries around the world, not just to commit acts of mayhem and terrorism for their own sake, but to weaken and destabilize the governments of the various states in which they're operating so that they can be destroyed and a Muslim government put in their place. And ultimately, the idea would be to unite all these Muslim governments into one under the restored caliphate. So Hamas has to be understood as being part of this global movement. And that not only means that the Palestinian struggle the jihad becomes a global imperative, as we are seeing, particularly since October 7th, but also that all the other Muslim states have a certain obligation to fight against Israel, against the Israeli state, and try to destroy the Israeli state as the vanguard of this global effort to reunite the Muslim communities into one single ummah. Every last communique from Mahmoud Abbas, from the Hamas leaders, from Palestinian Islamic Jihad, from Hezbollah, from Iran, they all mention Islam. When they talk about Israel, they talk about Islam. They understand Israel in an Islamic context that I have tried to explain here in brief. That Israel is an insult to Islam, an affront to Islam, because any land that belonged to the Islamic world at any time belongs by right to the Muslims forever. That's a concept that's based on the Quranic statement, drive them out from where they drove you out. So, that being the case, every point of their opposition is based on Islam. Iran has no beef with Israel otherwise. Iran has no border with Israel, no border dispute, no economic dispute, no economic competition. Why does Iran hate Israel? Because of Islam, because of the Islamic imperative. It's an Islamic republic. And so they read the Quran. It says, drive them out from where they drove you out. They think, well, we have to destroy Israel because that was Islamic land. I'm not even talking about 1948. I'm talking about the Ottoman Empire and the conquest by the Arabs of the area that is now Israel in the 7th century. And because it was ruled by Islamic law, it belongs to them forever. So, all that is made very clear, abundantly clear, and repeatedly clear by all the leaders in the Islamic world and all the leaders of the Palestinians. And yet it is the one aspect of this conflict that is completely ignored and never mentioned, not even once, in Washington or in Europe or at the UN, anywhere. They do not discuss the Islamic aspect of this conflict that is so central to the other side. They never mention it. They act like it doesn't exist. At Camp David, in Oslo, every last accord, Islam has no mention, has no role. And so the West is trying to pretend that this is a political dispute that can be solved in the ordinary political ways. And it is not, and never has been. It is a religious dispute that cannot be solved by a political solution. And the religious dispute is consistently, steadfastly ignored by everybody who has ever had a role in trying to solve this problem.
What is the solution then? If people can't recognize it, and if people do not see what it is, what are we supposed to do, the few people who do see it?
Well, I'm sorry to say there is no solution. There is only management of the problem. Because as long as there are believers in Islam, believers in the Quran and Muhammad, there will be people who think they have to wage jihad against Israel and destroy it. If Israel were the size of a postage stamp, there would still be people who thought that. Because the whole thing, they have to drive them out. So, the only thing we can do is manage it. Islamic law teaches you do not wage jihad against an enemy who has more than twice your strength, and you have no chance of winning. That's not just political, that's not just military strength. That's also political strength and the willingness to stand by your principles and not compromise them and give away at the negotiating table what you've won on the battlefield. And so that kind of strength needs to be recovered. Also, there needs to be a certain kind of pressure that can be exerted and should be exerted on the Arab states. After all, Egypt has been paid billions of dollars since the Camp David Accords were concluded in order not to go to war with Israel. And yet the Egyptian government has allowed for a massive spread of anti-Semitic material, including even Mein Kampf, which is a consistent bestseller throughout their country for decades, in violation of the specific words of the Camp David Accords. The American government can and should exert pressure on Egypt and on Jordan and on every state there that gets American money, which is pretty much all of them, and say to them, look, the Palestinians don't exist. You know it, and we know it. We've been pretending all these years. We're going to stop pretending. You know, and we know that the Palestinians were invented by Yasser Arafat and the KGB in 1964 as a propaganda tactic, and it's worked great, but it's over. We're dealing with Arabs here who are not different linguistically, culturally, politically, or religiously from the Arabs of Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan, and only slightly different from those of Egypt. And so you have some refugees. I don't mean the UN's list of refugees, which is the children and grandchildren of refugees and great-grandchildren. I mean, you have a dwindling number of people who actually left in 1948. Now, we're going to leave aside for the moment the fact that the Arab Higher Committee actually ordered the Arabs to leave in 1948, and that the vast majority of those who left were not driven out by the IDF. But leave that aside. Let's take every last one of those people, the surviving elderly people who left in 1948, and call them refugees. Now, they are Arabs. Take them in. Every refugee crisis, every refugee situation that has ever happened in the history of the world has been solved by the people who are refugees going to live elsewhere. And sometimes it may seem unkind and harsh. There were Germans who had lived in Königsberg, and their families had lived in Königsberg for centuries. And then Königsberg was taken after World War II and given to the Soviets. Why? Because the Germans started an aggressive war and lost it. And it's a rule of warfare from time immemorial that a country that starts an aggressive war and loses it may end up losing territory to the victorious countries in order to protect themselves against further such attacks. That's happened everywhere in human history. There are hundreds of examples. I'm giving you Germany after World War II because it's ready to hand, and most people are aware that it happened. You look at a map of Germany in 1939, it's substantially larger than Germany in 1945. Why? Because they started a war and lost it. So, why does this not apply to Israel? Because of this deeply ingrained hatred of Jews that we've been discussing. There's no other reason why Israel cannot and should not control those territories that it won in aggressive wars against it, wars it did not start, but it did not lose. And the Arabs absorbed the Germans who lived in Königsberg. They went to live in Germany, what was left of it. Or they went to live somewhere else. They moved to America, whatever. And nobody's whining about German refugees today. And there's no UN agency calling the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of those people refugees. Why do the Palestinians get a different treatment? You take them and you call upon those countries to settle them in a peaceful and humane manner and give them gainful employ. And you even fund the operation. So nobody can charge that this is anything inhumane that's being done. Why should this be treated so differently from every other refugee problem if they don't want to live in Israel? Otherwise, if they want to be loyal to the Israeli state, there are plenty of Arabs in Israel now who have no discrimination, no apartheid, none of that nonsense. They have full equal rights with the Israelis. So you want to join the Israeli state? Great. You want to go live in Syria? Great. But you're not going to have your Palestinian state because there are no Palestinians. It's a fiction. We're calling it out.
So this concept, let's call it Palestinianism, is really just a method to really destroy the Jews. It has no real historical roots. You mentioned in your book, if you look at the names
the only reason
of many Palestinians, their last names are referring to countries they come from, like Egypt, like Syria, like the Maghreb. So really, that's what it exists for. And let's not forget that Jews lived in Arab lands for many years with tremendous anti-Semitism. And in 1948, over 850,000 Sephardic Jews were kicked out of their countries as well. So you talk about some of the historical roots. What was it like for Jews pre-Israel to live in the Mandate of Palestine? We're talking about the 1929 massacres in Hebron and in other countries around the Middle East as well.
Yeah, it's really shameful. It's a shameful history because, the British get credit for fostering the establishment of the State of Israel because the League of Nations, the Ottoman Empire ceded the territory to the League of Nations as the Ottoman Empire was dissolving. The League of Nations gave it to Britain as the mandate for Palestine, for the creation of a Jewish national home. And the British administered it for 28 years, from 1920, or 26 years, from 22 to 48. And then the Jewish national home, the Israeli state, was founded. But what is lesser known, I discuss in an earlier book I wrote, The Palestinian Delusion, that the British tried everything they could to stop Jewish immigration to Palestine, to stop the creation of the Jewish national home. They even went so far as to tell Haj Amin al-Husseini, the Mufti of Jerusalem, who you mentioned earlier, who went and worked with Hitler and the Nazis during World War II. When he was in Jerusalem in the 1920s, in 1921 and 22, the British told him, if you carry out some pogroms against the Jews, we will not prosecute you, we will not arrest you, you'll have free reign, because we want to discourage the Jews from coming to this area. And he agreed. And so you have the Hebron massacre, you have so many other massacres that happened under his auspices, with the British turning a blind eye after that, all through the 1920s and 30s.
Yeah, it would even seem that, according to your book, Haj Amin al-Husseini was actually advising Hitler on the
that's
destruction
right.
of the Jews.
Yeah, it's interesting to note that there was all sorts of confusion, or I should say disagreement, among the National Socialist High Command as to what to do about the Jews.
Yeah.
Haj Amin al-Husseini served in the Turkish military during World War I, and the Turks at that time were carrying out the Armenian genocide, as well as the genocide of the Greeks and the Assyrians. They killed 1.5 million Armenians, 1 million Greeks, and 300,000 Assyrians. And a lot of those people who were killed in gas chambers. The Turks were the first to use them. Now, the Nazis, they didn't know what to do with the Jews. They had completely disenfranchised and dehumanized them, barred them from various professions, barred them from various sectors of public life, but they're still there in Germany, completely impoverished, completely dependent upon the state. And the German state obviously did not want them. So there was the plan to deport them all to Madagascar. But the war broke out. That became impossible because the Germans did not have command of the seas to deport hundreds of thousands or millions of people all that way to Southeast Africa. So, or the island off Southeast Africa. So then they come up with the final solution. And we start seeing the death camps with the gas chambers. Where did they get this idea? That all is unclear. But Hitler at this point is saying that people are saying history will judge us harshly. Actually, that's not the case, Hitler said. After all, nowadays, who remembers the Armenians? Where did he get the idea? Why was he thinking of the Armenians in the context of what he was doing? Haj Amin al-Husseini did not just have one meeting with Hitler and then he went home. He lived in Berlin from 1941 to 45. He was very close to Himmler and to Adolf Eichmann. And he, at one point, wrote a very angry letter because he had heard that a boatload of Jews were being deported to Palestine. And he said, you've got to turn this boat back. We don't want them in Palestine. You've got to think of some other way to deal with them. We will not accept them in Palestine, and this could very severely imperil our cooperation. And this was serious for the Germans because he had raised up 2 Waffen-SS divisions out of Bosnian Muslims in the Balkans. So they didn't want to lose the Arabs. He was also preaching to the Arabs in Arabic that they should join up with the Nazis. And they didn't want to lose this valuable ally. So they had to think of some other thing to do with the Jews. And it just happens that they hit upon the gas chambers, the same thing that Haj Amin al-Husseini had dealt with while serving with the Turks in World War I.
It's just so depraved and so disgusting to hear this history and to know that we're essentially seeing it all over again, where you have the collaboration of various groups in Europe and in the Middle East collaborating against the Jews and affirming Jewish murder.
Yes, it's deeply disturbing. That's one of the reasons why I wrote this book on anti-Semitism, to try to show the root causes of this and how dangerous it really is, and to counter this fashion of anti-Semitism that we see spreading around today. But it's the same thing, really, that we saw in the run up to the Holocaust, because it is so many people working on their narrow self-interest without realizing the larger implications of what they're doing. Like, you take, for example, the new push to create a Palestinian state with Carney of Canada and Macron of France and Starmer of the UK and Albanese and Australia, and they're all going to declare unilaterally that there's a Palestinian state, even though it doesn't have any borders or any government or anything really. And they just want to pacify the Muslims in their countries, which they've brought in large numbers, and make sure that they keep voting for their parties. But they're not realizing or not caring about the larger implications of what they're doing in terms of challenging the sovereignty of Israel and imperiling that sovereignty, calling for the dismemberment, most likely, of the Jewish state, so that a contiguous Palestinian state can be created. And it's all, of course, completely short-sighted in light of the fact that a Palestinian state is not going to pacify anything or end the jihad against Israel, because it is, as I explained before, based on religious imperatives that will not end with a political change.
Robert, I want to ask you a final question. Many people assume that you're Jewish, and you've been attacked as being a Jew, but you're not. Your background is with the Greek Orthodox Church.
Yeah, that's right. My grandparents were actually grew up in the Ottoman Empire and were exiled for declining to convert to Islam in the middle of World War I, and came to the United States.
So I'm just wondering, what gives you the power, the courage, and honestly, the interest to do such incredible research and spend so much time writing books about Islam, the dangers of Islam, anti-Semitism? What's giving you the power to do that? Because you're such a special personality. We're just wondering where that's coming from.
Well, you're very kind. I think that my interest in Islam originally came from my family's background and the fact that I wanted to understand what had happened. Because my grandparents, when I would ask them about life over there, they would say how great it was. And then I said, "Well, why'd you leave? We were exiled." "Why were you exiled?" Then they would clam up. So I wanted to know, and that leads right into Islam and understanding the supremacist, aggressive, expansionist, and violent aspects of Islam. And then that, of course, became something that became a matter of general interest after 9/11, and I was writing about it. And that leads to understanding that Israel is on the front lines of the global jihad. And so if you're going to be against jihad, you can't really stand against Israel and favor that jihad. Although consistency, of course, is not something that is very important to a lot of people. It is to me. And so this is why I think it's very important to stand today with Israel and the Jews in general.
It's 2025. America's debt is over $37 trillion, and the dollar just had its worst crash since 1973. That puts your savings and your family's future at risk. That's why we trust Alpha Omega Gold, a company that stands unapologetically with Israel and supports Stand Tall Israel. Visit ao.gold/stand to claim your free precious metals wayfinder guide, or call 1-855-426-4653 today. Protect your future before it's too late.